Here at IUCC, we identify as progressive Christian, which means our faith continues to progress as we evolve. We usually have more open stance on many of the social issues that you might discover. For instance, we are intentionally open affirming. We are a creation justice church, which means that we care for the green faith church. We care for the earth. As being open affirming, we're intentionally inclusive of the LGBT community, and really all individuals or ethnic groups or any sort of group of minority grouping that finds themselves discriminated or not quite like they fit in. We are intentional in our welcome for those folks, and I hope that if you have not been comfortable in the church before, you'll find yourself comfortable in this church because we really want to serve in our community. We find that we're a place that wants to see beyond our own selves, and we really want to be involved beyond these walls. And we're just so thankful that you came within these walls to share your experiences, your thoughts, your stories, and your wisdom with all of us. Just a couple of logistics. Now that you're here, welcome home. You can head out we call it the narthex in this front area, and then to the left to find your restrooms. You can also head out that door, but it will lock behind you. You'll need to come right back in this door if you do need to use the restrooms. That's about it. I just want to thank you for being here. I believe that this is such an important topic to discuss, and I'm really thrilled that you're all here to engage in it. So thank you so much for being here and enjoy the evening. And now I'm passing it off to Jeanette.
Thank you, Pastor Sarah. Hi, I'm Jeanette today of Multiracial Americans of California. I just wanted to welcome you tonight to our nonpartisan team talk on voter education and suppression. The right to vote is so significant that our students chose this topic tonight as the focus of our forum. We should all have equal access to cast our vote safely and fairly in every election. We vote for our leaders to represent us, and in turn, our leaders create laws and policies on our behalf. Exercising the right to vote is an important part of our democracy. But what if that right to vote is suppressed? Voter suppression is used as a way to influence the outcome of an election by preventing specific groups from voting. Disproportionately affected by these tactics are Black and brown people, students, women, the elderly, and people with disabilities. To prepare for this forum, our students researched the history of voting rights and how these rights have been and are currently being affected by legislation across the country. They learned that many states have enacted or proposed laws that restrict voting access, and that some states, like California, have expanded voting access. These students appreciate that the right to vote is fundamental. It is one that is at the very cornerstone of our democratic values in this country. They've worked so hard to put this together for you. They have worked so hard, and they've learned so much. And it is our focus not anyone else needs to. This team talk was a collaborative effort, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you two of the teams who worked on this event. They are Ryan Gordon and Ronald Lees. Please stand up, please. Multiracial Americans of Southern California. And in addition to tonight's forum, Ryan and Raul for the past year and a half have diligently worked on team programming centered on issues of race, identity, and social justice for our multiracial community. And I just want to give a big kudos and welcome everyone to this event. And next up, please welcome Jorge Fong, those who
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you IUCC for hosting us. My name is Jorge Franco. I am with the Orange County Community Relations. Along with me are human relations ambassador. There are these students over here in front, but you all stand so we can see who you are. The Human Relations Ambassador Program was a year-long internship designed for our youth around Orange County to develop leadership skills on social justices and with those skills, apply it to their communities and practice all around Orange County. So as Ned mentioned, these students have been working hard along with the students from Mass Multiracial Americans in California to provide and put on this forum here on voter education and voter suppression. So with that, I will pass it over to Raul to come on and introduce the panelists. Ryan.
Right, I'm just excited to get you organizations tonight. So we have Mass, which is the multiracial American Southern California. Mass is a 501c nonprofit that started over 20 years ago. Our mission is to advocate for and foster multiracial community. Mass creates activities and designs programs to serve the community, and there's awareness and understanding of this public multiracial communities. And then we have our OCC Religions Group. So OCHR is a private nonprofit 501c organization it was founded in 1991 with the purpose of developing and implementing human relations programs in partnership with schools, corporations, cities, organizations, and individuals. OCHR aims to foster the mutual understanding among residents and eliminate prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination in order to make Orange County a better place for all people to live, work, and do business. And lastly, our host, IACC. IACC is an open and friendly, just peace and global mission church. IACC is committed to diversity, spiritual growth, and putting faith into action, both globally and throughout the world. The Verifying Values Regional Church extends its track and welcomes all people, regardless of race, class, ethnicity, background, or sexual. And next, I'll bring the board to introduce our panelists.
Please welcome our four panelists for tonight's event. Please hold your applause to the Our first panelist is Mayor Farah Anand, who is the 23rd mayor of Irvine and is the first woman of color and Muslim woman to hold this position. She received the highest number of votes for mayor in Irvine's history. Dr. Fred Smoller is an associate professor of political science at Chapman University. He has been a Chapman faculty member since 1983 and his expertise in American politics, local government, and public administration. He's also the author of From Hypocrisy to Democracy, How Citizens Can Take Back Local Government. He recently received a $5 million grant to create the OC Sustainable Decathlon, which will be held at the OC Fairgrounds in fall 2023. Cynthia Valencia is a senior policy director and organizer at the ACLU of Southern California Orange County office. She leads the civic engagement program, where she organizes volunteers to educate local Tennessee voters on their voting rights. She's also a redistricting advocate. Our final panelist is Roberta Correa, who is the leadership development director for Resilience Orange County. They have been involved in local advocacy and organizing efforts since 2012. And they work to advance into immigrant rights in Orange County, specifically those who are marginalized. Thank you for all of our panelists today.
Hello everyone, my name is Ariana Perez, and I will be your MC for the night. Tonight's forum was completely organized to help multiracial Americans in Southern California, IUCC, and the Human Relations Ambassador Program. So to give you a rundown of what tonight will look like, the forum will be organized into 5 groups. Each group will present their research and ask questions to panelists. Now, let's turn our attention to the first group tonight, presenting the history of voting from Karina, Irene, Lucia, Raul, and Brian.
Hi everyone. What is democracy without the elections? And in this short history session, we'll be discussing voting in the U.S. starting from the Redistricting era all the way to the present day, showing regulation and influence of events that continue to shape elections. So in the beginning of the Redistricting era, the Constitution actually did not explicitly state anything that guaranteed the right to vote. However, the policy followed was that only white male candidates could vote. And then as states passed their own laws, they quickly passed laws to prevent all women and minorities from voting. And after the Civil War and during the Reconstruction era, the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870, allowing black men to vote, and the Congress powers to enforce that right. Also, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was also adopted, allowing American women the right to vote. However, even with these two amendments, many southern states tried to restrict African Americans from voting, and laws were put in place to effectively do that. But other than laws, there were also a lot of tactics such as threats, violence, intimidation, and other tools against minority voters to put in place to prevent their voting in the South. And as an example of how the history is suppressed in voting, these suppression tactics are not things that happened in the past. And for example, in the 2008 election, similar tactics were used against many African American voters. So during the Obama campaign in 2008, there was racial rioting in the country where images of Obama appeared hanging from campuses and in support of the Charlotte killing. And there were alleged plans to murder black students, African Americans, and assassinated them. So these actions address suppression tactics similar to those of the South in the 1900s, used to create fear of the voters who were planning to vote for Obama and many other African American voters, in hope of suppressing the vote through fear of the city. And next, we'll have the full speak about the voting era. Thank you.
After the 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote, the South quickly began suppressing black voters as much as possible. They focused on retaining white supremacy in the electoral process, using loopholes of the 15th Amendment to implement a range of measures to disenfranchise black voters without explicitly characterizing them as race. These measures included poll taxes, literacy tests, all white primaries, felony disenfranchisement laws, grandfather clauses, fraud, and intimidation to keep African Americans from polls. For example, at the 1890 Mississippi State Convention, a new constitution was adopted that included a literacy test and poll tax for eligible voters. The impact of the legislation was swift. By 1910, registered voters among African Americans dropped to under 2% in Mississippi. Additionally, in the 1898 Williams v. Mississippi ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the state's poll tax, disenfranchisement clauses, grandfather clause, and literacy tax on the basis that the new constitution didn't actually discriminate between races, and it has been shown that their actual administration was simple, only that evil was possible under them. Other actions, including poll taxes and all-white primaries, heavily disenfranchised black voters and kept their numbers extremely low for a very long time. Please look at the slide. So I know it's hard to see, but number one says, so it says, draw a line around the number or letter of the sentence. Once again, clearly, this has nothing to do with an election or vote, and it's designed to use the measure votes. Let's look at another one. Number 8 says, draw a line with a letter or vote that comes facing out. Once again, there's clearly no purpose to these questions, and they have nothing to do with the electoral process or test how much a voter knows about the election or vote. Additionally, because African Americans have very limited education of access to education up until this point, these questions that might appear simple to us were made even more difficult. Let's look at our last one. Number 13. In the line below, cross out each number that is more than 20 but less than 30. Once again, there is nothing relevant to election or voting, but these questions were used to discriminate against voters who might have difficulty understanding the answer. Thank you. Now I will be talking about the Voting Rights Act.
So going on in 1960s, civil rights leaders worked to organize and ensure civil rights movements to bring the voting rights of African Americans to the United States. And one example is just a ballot, which was a 1957 speech given by Virginia to advocate voting rights for African Americans in the United States. And another good example is Selma's Montgomery March, which was a peaceful march protest starting from Selma, Alabama, to the capital city of Montgomery to see African Americans constitutional rights votes. However, there are sacrifice issues with Mexico's tear gas and wet after the Supreme Court. So they fought back by initiating Bloody Sunday, which was another peaceful protest of 600 members traveling from Salt Lake City, US Highway to the Capitol on March 7, 1965. All of these earlier efforts led to the passage of Voting Rights Act in 1965, which was passed by the US Assembly on June 6, 1965. And the President Johnson officially signed the bill into law on August 6, 1965, with Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders such as Rosa Parks in 1970. So what this act did, it basically prevented the racial discrimination voting. But first, it began to use the diversity test to prevent discrimination against minorities who were educating them to pass the test. So everyone could get equal political representation regardless of education, beliefs, intelligence levels, wealth, and demographics. This act also gave women, Native Americans, and immigrants civil rights votes. And second, it provided the federal oversight of areas that are predominantly white. So it also helped minorities to register for elections because they have elections or was such needed to vote. And third, it allowed the U.S. Attorney General to investigate the use of full text in state and federal elections. Passage of the amendment in 1964 initially began the use of full text in federal elections. However, full text in state elections were initially began in 1966 by the Supreme Court. And next, we'll have Brian to speak about Shelby versus order case.
All right, so let's talk about the Shelby County versus order case. First, we're going to say about some facts of the case. So, in 2013, the Supreme Court Shelby County versus order case had a direct effect on the voter suppression laws that were put into place prior to the 2016 election. So, as background, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution protects our due process. The 15th Amendment protects citizens who deny the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 10th Amendment says that all rights not granted to the federal government goes to the states. Article 4 of the Constitution guarantees the right of self-government for each state. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 that ranges all over. Section 5 prohibits certain districts from changing their election laws and procedures without authorization. Up here, the states that are dark red, they're covered as a whole state is under this contention of Section 5. The United Red States, which California is one of them, have certain counties that cover by this section, and the very United Red, which is in the Northeast, have certain townships that cover by Section 5. And Section 4D defines eligible districts as well as voting rights as of November 1st, 1964. And then it has less than 50% turnout in the 1964 presidential election. So these districts have to go to the Attorney General or Washington D.C. District Court. That the changes are actually negatively discriminatory based on race and minority. So Shelby County, Alabama, filed suit in district courts, and they want to declare to the judgment that Section 5 and 4B are unconstitutional, and they're going against the enforcement of these sections. And the district court upheld the constitutionality of sections. The U.S. Court of Appeals would see as well, Congress would authorize the sections does not exceed powers. They appealed again, and that's the Supreme Court. And the question was,
Does the rule of section 5 exceed Congress's authority and violate the 10th Amendment and Article 4? There's a 5-4 decision that section 4 is unconstitutional, essentially because the conditions that the section was under no longer exist. The constraints made sense back in the 1960s and 70s, but for its support don't anymore, so it's an unconstitutional violation of the state's power. The criteria for determining these federal review was outdated for its support, and Justice Clarence Thomas argued that section 5 is unconstitutional as well because of the blatant discrimination previously present was no longer evident. So the impact of this decision was the advancement of voter ID laws, we'll talk a bit about later. The problematic declaration that latent racism no longer exists in legislation and voting legislation. It also resulted in including work of polling places. It also results in the closing of a lot of polling places. It took voters off of state voter rolls, and it continued to practice segregation. So next, I'll bring up a cool chapter of 2020.
The 2020 election had a record turnout, with nearly 66% of all registered voters, or approximately 158.4 million people submitting ballots. This turnout was 7% higher than in 2016 and the highest in 120 years. The rise in turnout was fueled partly by the bitter fight between incumbent President Donald Trump and challenger Joe Biden. For example, a survey found that 83% of registered voters said that it really mattered to them who won. Another big factor was the dramatic steps that many states took to expand mail balloting and early voting. Unfortunately, there were also many claims of election fraud. President Trump's campaign and others filed at least 63 lawsuits contesting election processes, vote counting, and vote certifying in the United States, including Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. All of these cases were dismissed as the charges of election fraud were entirely unfounded. All evidence points to Biden winning the election fairly. Additionally, these claims of election fraud led to more voter suppression laws being passed. Here's a quote that illustrates the degree to which people believe the election results were fabricated. Somebody said this: all of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by bold and radical left Democrats and fake news media. That is what they have done and what they are doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's status quo. Now, Alicia talking about current suppression laws.
So far, Republican legislators in 4 states, Arizona, Missouri, Indiana, and Carolina, have 317 bills that have made it through. Monarchists declared 88 restricted bills in the last legislative session. Legislators in 5 states, Florida, Missouri, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Tennessee, have also passed 6 bills to initiate more partisan ballot reviews. 4 also initiate such reviews of the 2020 election results, according to the Voting Institute. Legislators in the United States drafted more than 444 restricted bills in the last year, according to the Voting Institute, and 34 bills have become law. Eventually, 19 states have passed 34 bills that restrict voting. This will all be also by restricting the Voters' Right Act of 1969. However, over 25 states have enacted over 62 laws that expanded voting access in some way. 50 states have made mail-in voting easier, while 9 states have made it easier to register to vote. 6 states enacted automatic voter registration, with extensions of the community in new states.
At this time, our history group will be using the time for questions panel regarding the history of voting rights. Take it away, Irene.
These 2 questions for Dr. Smaller. So, what kind of changes have been made to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and do you have any predictions of further changes to the act based on the current trend of voter suppression?
Okay, well, I have 3 minutes. Well, first, I'll get to that in a second. I want to commend the Human Relations Commission. I was a commissioner for 6-7 years in the 90s under Rusty Kennedy, and I saw how hard the staff worked, and now that we have the interns, that's just exceptional. The work you do is important. Never forget that. Think of racism as a social disease, just like the other diseases that people have. And the way to combat it is with eternal vigilance. And the Bridges program and all the things you do, you're not the most well-funded agency or department in the county budget, but I believe you're the most important, given the changes that are taking place and given the things that you're fighting for, justice, inclusivity, and things like that. Now for the question. It's a complicated question. What the excellent survey of history on voting rights tells us that there have been periods of expansion and periods of contraction. I would argue the periods of expansion took place with the Constitution itself, as well as the passage of the 15th Amendment that said, in theory, African-American former slaves could now vote, and then the passage of the 19th Amendment, which women finally could vote. We've only been at it for half of our history. And then the 26th Amendment, which said that 18-year-olds could vote. This was during the Vietnam War. So there's an expansion, but there have also been periods of contraction, which you talked about, the whole Jim Crow law, as well as was discussed, the current effort to suppress the vote. And this is particularly important because I'd like you to think that democracy is being threatened overseas by Russia in Ukraine, and here in the United States domestically by those who spread falsehoods about voter fraud and about who won the last election. Let me be explicit and clear. There is no voter fraud in the United States of any negligible amount. And political science has studied this question extensively. Out of 1 billion votes cast in a study done by Loyola Marymount, less than 31 of those votes were done where someone was masquerading as someone else. To me, there is no voter fraud. This is all trumped up exactly in order to dissuade certain people from voting. People of color, poor people, college students, all of this nonsense, all of these laws, that's the ulterior motive. Now, what has happened since the Voting Rights Act? Obviously, in several years, they updated the Voting Rights Act up until 2013, which is part of your question. And that is when Shelby County, Alabama, went to their local judges, district court judges, and said, we want out from the voting rights provisions. The Voting Rights Act, passed in 1965, is one of the greatest pieces of social legislation ever passed in the United States. And if I could give you an assignment, please go to the YouTube and watch Lyndon Johnson speak before the joint House of Congress calling for the passage of the Voting Rights Act 100 years after the end of the Civil War. I'll stop, but I will just say, let me give you language from the speech. As Johnson, a Southerner, thundered away, there is no constitutional issue, the president said. The command of the Constitution is plain. There is no moral issue. It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. There is no issue of states' rights or national rights. There's only the struggle for human rights. Rarely do we ever see a president speak so clearly and directly and forcefully for justice and good. And that's what came out of 65, and I will stop there because the story takes a terrible turn under Shelby County versus Alabama. Go ahead. I have to stop, right?
start again, because I'll ask you, why would you say, Dr. Smaller, that the Shelby County versus Holder case is so important in your opinion?
Well, it was important. It was actually, I said, against Alabama. It was Shelby County, Alabama against Holder, who was the Attorney General at the time. The Voting Rights Act covered two basic areas. One were general provisions. You can't have a poll tax. You can't have, discrimination in terms of having people, harassed when they try to vote. You can't have white primaries. You can't have all the things that were done to deprive African Americans the right to vote. But the second part of the Voting Rights Act had to do with what is called pre-clearance. That is, for 100 years, there were parts of the country, and we saw the picture, that clearly discriminated against African Americans. They couldn't vote. They were harassed. There were poll taxes. There were literacy tests, all sorts of nonsense. The literacy tests had no meaning. The only purpose was to exclude African Americans. So they passed in the Voting Rights Act a Section 4B, which was this notion of, if you're going to do anything locally with your voting rights, you got to be pre-cleared by the federal government. And what happened in 2013 under a much more conservative court is that provision was ruled unconstitutional. Now, you got to be clear here. They didn't say you can't have pre-clearance. They said the formula was so old that racism, we've gotten past Jim Crow, we've gotten past Bull Connor, and so there isn't a problem anymore. But if Congress wants to pass a new formula, an updated formula, then they could. But they also probably knew Congress would never agree on a new formula. So it essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act of '65. And it set the stage. It was a wink and a nod to everybody who said at the state level, go ahead, pass more restrictive voting laws. We won't overturn them. So the Supreme Court rules specifically, but they also send out messages. And this was the message that they sent. And so that time, we've had a real contraction in voting rights. And you can list all those things about vote by mail and early voting and any number of things. It was absolutely seminal, and Congress has tried to come up with a new formula and new legislation, but sometimes it gets past the House, but it gets vetoed, or because of cloture, it doesn't get through the Senate. And so it's a very important piece. Is that okay? All right. Now it's someone else's turn.
Yeah.
You know, as college teachers, you get us going. Ask us what time it is, we'll tell you how to build a clock.
Next slide, please. Ms. Valencia and Ms. What practices does local officials take before the 2020 election to ensure that districts were properly represented the people?
Yeah, I can go. So I would say the most important thing that California did before 2010 actually was to create a commission to draw congressional, state senate, and state assembly districts. So this commission was regular people across the state who applied to be part of the commission and draw it, as opposed to what had happened before was the elected officials in the state of California would draw it themselves. So people would draw what districts they would get elected to. A lot of people currently do that now. So the specific question is, what did local officials or municipalities do? Honestly, not much. Most municipalities, if they did anything about districts, it's because they were sued or about to be sued. So in the city of Anaheim, there was a lawsuit that we filed in 2016 because despite the city of Anaheim having a 50% Latina population, they had never had a Latina elected official. Which doesn't make any sense. So they were sued and they had to draw a new map, and the court had to work with them to draw a map. The city of Santa Ana, which many of you know is like an 80% Latina population city, they had an all Latino city council.
but they have a significant population of Asian Americans that also live there. So they had a potential lawsuit where they had to draw an Asian plurality district. So they redrew that in 2018, and now they have an Asian American council member who was elected in that district. So the answer is most local officials or local municipalities will not willingly choose to create districts that are more representatives of their communities, but the state has passed some laws very recently that have done a lot of good. So the Fair Maps Act was passed by the state of California in 2018, which created even more rules in addition to the Voting Rights Act to ensure that local municipalities do not take advantage of that to try to push forward their partisan politics or for their own self-interest. So this year, when we did the 2021 redistricting, was the first year ever that law applied to redistricting. And honestly, we're working on legislation to make that stronger because we found a lot of flaws and special interests and that local municipalities have taken to ensure their reelection or their reelection of their political party or reelection of just special interests that they have.
I wanted to add in regards to back in 2016, everyone was very happy about this congressional blue wave that came to Orange County, right? But I think locally, there was a lot of red undercurrents that I think need to be highlighted. In the city of Santana, one of the biggest players that we saw is the Santana Police Officers Association. So they really have an interest at trying to have someone, their interests be represented at City Hall. And so you saw them flexing their power to recall candidates that opposed police raises. So it's either you're going to vote for police raises or we're going to recall you, right? That's the power. And then most recently, if you saw that there was a scandal around them playing copyright music so that they don't, so they evade accountability. So, that there's this issue around who has control of our local elections, of our local government and power. And those interests are like, for instance, the police union. And then I also wanted to mention in regards to this new Board of Supervisor district that we have. I'm so excited, District 2, having the first Latino Voting Rights Act district. So having a very progressive voice on the Board of Supervisors, because, at least for me, we need a supervisor that challenges the Sheriff's Department. Orange County transfers the most amount of people to ICE for deportation. And so for the past 3 years, our Board of Supervisors have done nothing to hold Don Barnes accountable for being the deporter-in-chief in California. So having a new Latino Voting Rights Act district gives us the opportunity to elect someone that is going to hold, to make things better for the immigrant community and for everyone across, Orange County. So.
Thank you.
This question is for Dr. Smolder. How are the demographics of the U.S. changing, and how do these changes affect the elections?
Could you put my slide up, number 42? Okay. My view. Going to upset some people. Some of you may agree. What can I do? If you want to understand what's going on the issue of voter suppression, look at that slide. By the year 2050, U.S. non-white population will, for the first time in our history, shift. This is the coming white minority. Those cannot be changed. They have really nothing to do with immigration and building a wall. If you put up a perfect wall and not a single person came past, those numbers would stay the same because of birth rates. It's just that simple. And so if you understand that, then you have to understand that there are two parties with two very different visions for the United States. One party is the party of the status quo, the old guard, John Wayne. That's why he's in the airport, because he wants to know who's in control. And the other is everybody else. The first group is white, it's male, it's straight. And the second group is people of color, it is women, it is people who are gay and who are tolerant of gay people and don't think this is the greatest threat to the universe. And what is happening is in those states where Republicans are in the majority in the legislature, they are holding on by their fingernails, using all the laws that they can to keep those people down. That's what's going on. And over time, we're going to move in the direction of a more diverse society. But that's what's taking place right now. And so do demographics matter? Yes. One, they explained the rash of 62 voter repression laws, which have absolutely nothing to do with fraud and everything to do with keeping certain people away from the polls. And the second thing those numbers explain is that over time, one group is going to become the majority. And we will then hit an inflection point. Now, a lot of people ignored this stuff until 2008. Quite frankly, when African-American President Barack Obama beat two of the whitest people, first John McCain and then Mitt Romney. Now, what we know is that if only white people voted in that election, Obama would have lost. That's a fact. But because everyone else was voting, we had a different result. And if you say, gee, Smoller, you're racist, reductionist, this is critical race theory, whatever you want to say, look at the confirmation of our Supreme Court justice. And look what happened after the Senate voted. The entire Republican Party, which I believe is a white nationalist party, left the chamber. This has never happened before. That's the message they want to send. Thank you.
This final leadership question will be directed to Mary now. Where can we make history as the first woman of color to be elected mayor of Oregon, one of the first women?
We didn't just do the show. Well, that was a
And you're
significant
the
win.
first woman of color, the first Muslim woman to be the largest city in the US. So can you please describe your experience and what was it like to be a candidate in a local election?
What was it like to be a candidate? Very difficult. I think it's, comparing candidacy for me compared to anyone, there was no one else that I could compare myself with at the time, because it seemed like I was being targeted for who I was, what religion I practiced, not for the values that I stood for. And so throughout the campaign, the difficulty was making sure that I was in charge of the narrative, making sure that I was sharing the values that I stood for, what I wanted to see in our city, and keep it very positive as negativity was, directed towards me. And the attacks, were so profound. They weren't just about my policy, they were about who I am, who I associate with, the fact that I'm Muslim, the fact that I'm a woman, that even came up, like, comparing me to a white woman, because there was a white woman and myself. And it was almost as if we were being pitted against each other as women. Like, who is better? Maybe a white woman is better than this woman of color. And I think that was very difficult to understand and comprehend during the campaign, to keep my focus on the goal of putting policy and values out there when the attacks were very negative and very personal. And then I think that's what we see a lot of times when people of color, especially women of color, run for office, is they're attacked and it becomes very personal to them. They're not attacked on what they stand for or their policies. So always keep that in mind as you're seeing campaigns step up and hear what people are saying. You'll be able to distinguish between the two. Because it's easy to say to someone, hey, you voted this way on this issue, and that's what I'm calling you out for. But it's very cleverly disguised when it's, oh, look who this person is and who she or he associates with. And it might be a group that we don't really like. And that's something that you want to keep in your mind when you're looking at campaign materials.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, history presenter. Now that you're familiar with the history of voting in the United States, let's move on to our second group presenting, voting suppression for foreign elections from Hannah, Samantha, Claudia, and myself, Ryan, and Rowan.
Thank you, Ariana. So our group will be covering voter ID laws, limited early voting, residential addresses, voter purges and engaging, and gerrymandering. In the past, voter suppression was quite related. Nowadays, voter suppression tactics are more subtle, yet they can still discourage certain groups from voting. Our group will then have votes are suppressed prior to an election.
Because initially established as a process of the list also in photo and eliminating past voters to be relocated or accident. Voter purge essentially means the list of names of individuals eligible to vote on action. Voter purging we use our political parties. Sometimes using Additionally, the bill is already cited in their shareholders are able to vote in nationwide elections without hard citizenship from voting in local elections. Ultimately, unfair voter privileges are still occurring in America and change is still from franchise at all Americans. Next up, we have Ryan talking about voter ID.
So voter ID laws are discriminating against voters with more than 25 million voting Americans who don't have a government issued vote. Voter ID laws are a burden for many voters who have the right to vote and lose registration. They don't allow Americans to participate in the process. Many low-income people, religious minorities, elderly, people with disabilities don't have access to ID that they need. They either can't afford it or can't obtain a government issued vote. Currently, 35 states have laws requesting or requiring voters to ID polls. Some states like Arkansas, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Wisconsin have stricter laws which make it even more difficult for voters to cast ballots. These laws were passed in response to the election and admitted widespread. Yet it has been shown repeatedly, and that was a result that voter fraud and illegal voting are not systematic and widespread. Several more states have tried to pass voter ID laws, but they're currently being challenged in courts on a state-by-state basis of constitutionality. Arkansas Act 249 was overturned in the constitution. This law tightened the current voter ID requirement by eliminating the option that allowed voters to have their vote counted even if they didn't have an ID, as long as they signed a sworn statement in the voter registry. Montana's SB 169 was also deemed unconstitutional as it disenfranchised students, the elderly, and the indigenous community of Montana. Voter ID laws are very powerful form of voter suppression. They restrict the right to vote and prevent a lot of eligible voters from participating in elections and conducting process. At the recommend next, I hope resolutions 3 districts. So there are states that present materials for verification, but a lot of people are living in a home, there are many adults in that household that don't have utility bills tied to their name. This means that they don't have utility bills through their address. Just for some context, in California, the laws that require are water, electricity, and was also required $1,000 in utilities. This led to ripple effects, and this all very clearly according to Ellen Bennett, the director of the Water Quality Center at the Public Policy Institute of California, estimated for public health and safety, it's important for people to have restored their pets, clean water, and power. And then another example is North Dakota. There are Native American Indian reservations that are clean after residents, but many of them do not have access. One of the Native Americans decided to number them and make it up so that everyone did have access. And I'll pass it over to everyone. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Voter suppression in the form of voting pressure on officials was not as likely to happen in previous years. However, we can see through past events that this has occurred. The most obvious and recent example of nominees attempting to take advantage of officials was in early January 2021, when President Donald Trump called Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in an attempt to get him to sign a couple tens of thousands of votes. And even made an attempt to threaten Secretary Raffensperger with criminal offense or incorrect ballots, even though they confirmed all the ballots validity. You can see sorry. This next. No. Sorry, preview of the future. So sorry, okay. Redistricting is the process by which congressional and state legislative districts are drawn. In congressional redistricting, states determine their own districts, which is done every 10 years. It is often used to benefit a specific group, which is called gerrymandering. There are two types: first racial and second political. The Supreme Court case, Shaw versus Union, rejected a North Carolina redistricting plan because of how obviously it was drawn to racially segregated voters. Part of the gerrymandering is done when a specific party will create a district that ensures that they will win the elections. Now we have a question period with our panelists.
This is for Ms. Guerra, who is affected by voter ID laws and representation restrictions.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share this question with Cynthia, but I did want to share at least in Santana, the OC Registrar's office shared where voting centers are. So for those that don't know, in Orange County, we have new voting centers, which you can vote by sending in your ballot by mail. You can also attend the vote center itself, or you can do a drop box. And so when they were doing the maps of the drop boxes, a lot of the drop boxes were put where they were high propensity voters in the city. The city of Santa Ana has a sizable white population, and this population lives north of 17th Street. So the voting center drop boxes were placed north of the city, and there was few placed south of the city. So I just wanted to mention that because that is, I don't know if it was intentional, but you know, in terms of the high propensity voter was that was used to place where the votes, where the drop boxes were placed. The other I wanted to mention in Costa Mesa, one of the ways that we were part of the redistricting there, and Costa Mesa has a very Latino Voting Rights Act district. And so it was very interesting because the other council members, white council members, there's only one Latino council member, in the redistricting process, there weren't that many changes. But because of the Latino Voting Rights District, it would push if you wanted to incorporate the most Latino population in that district, it would, which is the intention, right, to have the plurality, it pushed other people, white people, into these other districts. So these other white council members and residents were like, no, 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 like, we're not gonna you're not rich enough for us. You know, you're rich, but not rich enough for this district. And so these other districts, white districts, were pushing back and saying, you're not gonna change our district lines. So the only other result was to change the Latino district. And so the council member, you know, as much as he wants to push, the maps have to be approved by the whole council. And so he compromised. And so the Latino population wasn't captured, all of it wasn't captured in that district. So it's interesting that the other white districts didn't compromise on who is their representative. But for the Latino district, the first one, they did compromise. And so I wanted to mention that in terms of, you know, align with this question. And also in Garden Grove, there was a fiasco over there. They first didn't want to host a redistricting process because the numbers weren't that substantial in terms of the population growth. So there was no reason for them to do new maps based off 2020 census data. And so based off the ACLU and other partners to scare them with the lawsuit for not engaging in this process, then they started to start this process of redistricting in Garden Grove. And they publicized that Zoom was going to be a way that community members can provide. And this was the start of Omicron, if you remember. So there was reason to continue Zoom options throughout this whole process of redistricting, but if you look at the Garden Grove, we were working with Viet Rise, Okapica, and with the ACLU and Resilience in terms of developing maps. And we used so much data and information, and a very strong Vietnamese district population is underneath the 22 freeway. So the 22 freeway underneath that, in the city of Garden Grove, very, very strong Vietnamese district. We were advocating to make the district horizontal, so then that way it captures the Vietnamese district into one strong district. But the Garden Grove City Council said, no, 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 we're gonna put them into vertical. We want to do it vertical. And we got a lot of resistance. We got a lot of resistance from the council. And honestly, it's the gentrifiers, gentrification, development, developers. All of those folks have a big play in terms of making Disney's taking over Garden Grove too, right? Those Disney craps. So that's what happened in Garden Grove. They diluted the Vietnamese vote. And so that's what I got to share. And so I voter ID laws and some of these things I know you're
Yeah,
going to mention.
I can just answer real quick. So thankfully in California, we don't have any voter ID laws. If you know anyone that's trying to vote and anyone asks them for an ID, please report that, because that is illegal in California. Thankfully, that was a really hard fought for victory in California. But a big thing is residential restrictions, which was mentioned in the presentation. California had the most votes ever in 2020, obviously because it was an extremely high profile election, but also because we did vote by mail to everyone in the state. And there was no fees for postage. There were more options than ever to vote, including voting in person the day of the election if you've never registered before, which hasn't really happened before. But people who don't, this doesn't work out for is people who are unhoused, people who frequently move housing, people who don't have stable housing. So there's a lot of people that, while for a lot of us, the vote by mail option was really great, for people who are poor or don't have access to transportation, and people who are detained, because there are people who are incarcerated who are legally able to vote, and we at the ACLU have worked really hard to try to get them to vote. Unfortunately, sheriff's departments are terrible to work with and create a lot of barriers of trying to get people who are currently incarcerated to vote. So there's a lot of there's always more that we can get people to vote. So that's the next fight.
Can I make a,
Thank you so much.
can I make a brief comment? No, not enough time. What? Oh, okay.
Ms. Valencia, how is census data used in redistricting mode? Does gerrymandering have more of a positive or negative impact?
Yeah, so as Dr. Smoller was stating earlier, is about how much the United States population is changing. It is rapidly changing everywhere. It has changed so much in California. It has changed so much in Orange County. So it's extremely important that we have accurate, good, well done census data. Unfortunately, in 2020, we had a lot of different factors. The administration wanted to put a citizenship question, which was going to deter Asian communities, the Black communities, and Latina communities from potentially answering that question. Luckily, we were able to, file a lawsuit, and that question wasn't on there, but the damage was done because the news cycle kept talking about the citizenship question. Obviously, COVID did not help because the methods of reaching people who are harder to reach, as we stated before about mailing, which is going in person and talking to them. So people who were volunteering didn't feel comfortable during a global pandemic to go out and meet face-to-face with people. So people who are unhoused weren't really able to be counted either. So there's a lot of, having an accurate, well-done census is extremely important for creating districts. So to the second part of the question, which is about gerrymandering. So in the presentation, you saw the picture of the very oddly shaped district. That is very common for gerrymandering, but not always, because sometimes we just have odd shaped, places like cities or counties. And we have laws that are supposed to protect certain populations from voting. So you were talking about the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is to make sure that race isn't the main factor when you're creating districts. But we hear these stories about all the lawsuits and issues that are happening in other states, southern states that are, there's lots of voting rights issues and gerrymandering issues, but in California, it's happening too. So Roberto mentioned a lot of them, but I think a good one in Orange County is that we have two terms. It's called cracking and packing. So cracking is when you split up communities of color to prevent them from having votes, or you put as many of them as possible into one district so that their votes cannot be shared as much. So what happened in 2010, the Orange County Board of Supervisors, they cracked the Latina community in Anaheim and Santa Ana to prevent them from being able to elect a candidate of their choice. So it doesn't mean that Latino people have to vote for Latina candidates, but that's what's happened in the city of Santa Ana and Anaheim. So the fact that they are unable to elect a candidate of choice is extremely unlikely. And the population of Orange County in 2010 during the census was about 20%. We have 5 districts. So the Latina community should have been able to elect at least one representative. So now it's over 30%. So that community absolutely should be able to elect a candidate of choice. The Board of Supervisors' current configuration was extremely unlikely to support that, but they 100% would have been sued if they didn't create a Latina majority district in Orange County because of the Voting Rights Act. So they did create one. However, we have other gerrymandering situations. So Orange County is changing demographically, politically, and the point of redistricting is to accurately represent the people who live there, including race and political party. So if you have a county that is 30% Republican, 30% Democrat, and 40% no party preference, and that should be kind of reflect what county looks like, a pretty, Republican safe seat, a pretty Democrat safe seat. And the other two seats should probably, flip back and forth depending on the population. In Orange County, the current Board of Supervisor makeup is majority Republican. So they intentionally drew lines to ensure that it was going to be safe for Republicans. And that's not the point of redistricting. And that's true everywhere, right? It doesn't really matter what the party is, but you're supposed to accurately represent what it is. So Orange County successfully prevented more progressive Latina candidates from succeeding by separating the Latina communities of Anaheim and Santa Ana. They did that. They did that for many years, and they were able to keep those candidates off from the board. Now, luckily, we have a new seat that's extremely important in Orange County, but we also have seats in Irvine because they actually broke Irvine in half because they didn't want a potential Democrat candidate to win Irvine or like this district easily. Unfortunately, technically it was legal. There is not enough evidence to show that it was for those specific reasons. But these are the kinds of things that we can't just believe that this is only happening in like South Carolina or Georgia, because there's still a lot that we can do and should do, not just in California, but especially in Orange County.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion before an election period. Now let's hear from our third group today, voting discussion during an election, which will be presented by Sabrina and Lisa.
Our group is focused on obstacles and suppression that voters face in the election. First up, we have Vanessa, covering broken machines in mass public election. The 2018 general election was seen as the hottest turnout in decades. While many voters were able to cast about 50% in that elections, others faced long lines, small election voters, and unaccepted closed polling. There was an estimate that some 3 million voters waited 30 minutes or more to cast the ballot. Registering or voting is especially tested to receive people presented certain county and pre-existing conditions. Some disabled people who rely on transportation assistance face logistical obstacles as other forms of transportation came to virtual office nationwide, and the sharing of vehicles was self-service. Voting machines don't have the best transportation. During voting in November, there was voting machines in Iowa, voting machines in Dallas and bridges in LA. Electronic forms typically elected laptops and tablets are mostly connected to a registration databases. And there are other different sources there. There are also touchscreen things in voting, where a voter can select one candidate, but someone else not, also creating some of the most citizen errors to vote. This vote-flipping phenomenon often happens because voters rejected to celebrate the machine before voting started. I will not pass on to Hello, I'm going to discuss several ways that laws and practices have made it hard for people to pass the law. In September 2021, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed Senate Bill claiming the increase in public trust in elections. The law requires voters to be mailed in ballots to provide the state identification, social security number or driver's license that they use when they first register to vote. This led to many ballots being rejected, as many people did not consider to show ID and there's no way to check. An example of the consequences of this law is here Texas rejected 409 out of 1,373 ballots in one day because of applications. Sold to the polls is an effective way for people in Black church communities to cast their vote. After Sunday morning service, members get into church buses, vans, and cars to go vote. By operating on Sunday before the election, Sold to the polls increases voter turnout because it allows people who have to work through the week to still cast their vote. Service not only helps church members but also community members, as polling centers can be 20 miles away. In Georgia, the number of polling centers has increased by 10% since 2013. There have been many efforts across many states to limit social rules. In February 2021, Georgia State Representative Gerrymandering introduced a bill that only allow voting on between Monday and Friday, thus limiting social rules. Similarly, North Carolina passed a bill in 2013 that eliminated Sunday polling. This bill was eventually shut down by the federal courts because they recognized that this disproportionately harms people of color who have the highest rate of legal voting. How can voting boxes be amended? In October 2020, the New York Times reported that the California Republican Party has admitted responsibility for placing more than 50 accepted legal official drop boxes or mail-in ballots in Los Angeles, Fresno, and Orange counties. The average person who charges boxes will use from the original drop boxes. After admitting to the new act, the spokesperson for the California Republican Party said that the party would continue to restrict control. And now we're going to pass on to the I encourage homeless consolidation in order to question that resistance. During the years, many cities around the country have reduced the number of homeless, especially in low-income areas, and long lines have been increasing. To give you a picture, in response to the early days of the pandemic, some voters waited in line for hours before the tax ballot. In Texas in July 2020, voters learned the day before the election that a number of polling stations would be closed, beginning to normalize information on voters. To give a specific example, in 2021, the Indiana Secretary of State, Connie Lawson, learned 170 voting places in the county, home to the state's largest Latino and second largest Black communities. It's also proven that more communities in terms of voting, less people vote, especially from marginalized communities. For every 10 mile that a polling station moves to Black community, Black voter turnout goes down by 0.5%, up to 12%. It's a matter of access to education and cost to get into these polling stations. This also affects those living in countryside regions. During the 2020 primaries in Texas, consolidation of polling places into vote centers increased the distance to vote by an average of 4.3 miles. This impact is strongest in rural communities or rural counties and among Latino voters, whose turnout declined by 8%. Students are also affected by voter suppression, and university students are particularly affected. In 2019, the Iowa Senate introduced a bill which would prevent siloed voting locations in state-owned buildings, like the University of Iowa, Iowa State University, and Northern Iowa campuses. These state-operated universities are home to thousands of Iowa students who previously used polling stations located at the university's building. This is very convenient for them as they report on campus. However, while other actions taken on this bill, simple introduction of student records and voting in the way. Nationwide, student turnout in 2016 presidential election exceeded that of the fall presidential, or to see that people are eager and willing to vote. But
But according to Texas Institute, while Sherman and Wisconsin, with the state's voter ID law, took place, and in many states not passed, and despite the same factor. Wisconsin state required that all poll workers should check signatures on the student IDs, although some schools issuing modern IDs served as debit cards and dorm keys that had no signatures on them, which they considered serious. As well, the cards had 4-year expiration date, and even students with acceptable IDs must show proof of enrollment in the data. Now I have some students.
As Americans prepare to vote, attacks against Honduras, such as disinformational calls and text messages. In fact, one robocall will maliciously inform voters that they voted by mail. Their personal information will be collected to a public database used by police departments to track down old warrants and credit companies to collect outstanding debts. Just last year, 2 men using robocalls for disinformation were charged with a felony of voter information. Unfortunately, these methods of disinformation are especially targeting minorities in America. Across 5 states, tens of thousands of minority voters were told that voting through mail was dangerous. And in 2016, Black voters in Ohio were among the most targeted groups for digital media disinformation. Additionally, leading up to the 2020 election, Black and Latino voters were flooded with disinformational text messages to discourage them from voting. With this, another alarming issue has arisen: voter suppression. This is seen as an absence of voting among Black Americans due to the lack of morale and faith regarding the candidate's efforts for minorities. During the 2020 election, it was stated that the true swing demographic in the election would be Black voters under the age of 30. Not because of who they voted for, but due to the fact of their absence of voting. Apart from decreasing voter activity and perpetuating negativity surrounding voting, voter disinformation is also responsible for real threats to voters. Some people put themselves at risk due to scammers using false voter registration sites and ballot tracking services to mislead voters into sharing their personal information. Efforts like these have only been made easier in modern times due to the presence of social media. Particularly, some politicians have falsely claimed that ballots were abandoned and engaged in Wisconsin, decreasing voter morale. Additionally, Facebook posts circulated saying that ballots should be invalidated if they poll worker environment, like their initials, which is actually a requirement in many states and is not harmful to the voting process at all. Lastly, hashtags such as American descendants of slavery have been used by suppressors to increase voter repression and disinformation, even if they were not originally intended. Overall, many voters have been discouraged or deceived from voting due to disinformation. I will now be passing it on to Ian to discuss California and Orange County voting. Thank you.
My fellow presenters have been showing the negatives of voter suppression and its history. However, I would like to note and emphasize that California has created laws and resources that do aid individuals in their voting experience. The state has made voting very accessible to people no matter where they live. For example, Orange County specifically has voting centers throughout the county that have been transformed from the traditional polling place into a full-service voting experience. An individual can now cast their ballot at any location, register to vote, and even stop on a meeting. These things is not possible. All registered voters in Orange County will also receive a vote by mail ballot. They can, however, still cast their vote they just need to head over to the nearest vote. Ballot drop boxes are underway to ensure that one vote is secure. These are also available throughout the county and can be found on the Orange County registry. With the Voters' Choice Act of 2016, the goal was to ensure that the vote centers were as accessible and to all and allow for things such as updating individual registration, filling out a ballot, and even getting a new one. This bill eliminated tens of thousands of polling places and replacing them with absentee ballots and secure drops. This is a hope that there would be higher turnout, lower costs, and would be able to be voted to vote. To sum up, California and Orange County specifically have very convenient voting laws and many accessible ways for individuals to be able to vote. This is in contrast to other cities which can have very strict laws and limits, such as voter ID laws and other restrictions.
And at this time, we'll be moving on to the questions of the panel. Take it away, Leon.
So my question to Mayor Khan is, since the passage of the Voter Choice Act 2016 in California, have you seen positive impacts on elections?
Absolutely. We've seen voter turnout increase. And one of the things that I'll share with you guys is before that, I used to go on the UCI campus and talk to students there and really kind of get them excited about elections. And there wouldn't be much excitement there. One was during one of the primaries, I couldn't even find where the voting center was or where the booths were. They were hidden away. They were, finals were being held at the same time. So kids were more focused on their education and their finals than the act of voting. And so now with the opportunities of voting by mail, by having vote centers where you can go in throughout the week and vote drop-off mail centers where you can drop boxes where you can drop off your ballot, it really encourages more people to participate and gives them the variety that they need. The fact that you don't have to be within your own precinct to vote really helps those out that are either in school or working so that they're not running around trying to take time off to get to a center to vote. That flexibility has definitely helped us in the long run in getting more and more people to vote, because the more access you provide folks, the easier it becomes for them. And then it gets them to a point where they feel like the system is working for them, not against them.
My question is for Professor Smoller, and it's opponents of early voting say that people vote before election day, they are less informed. Can you tell us why early voting is a good idea? And possibly your opinion on
I'm going to do that. I just want to make two comments. First, Cynthia mentioned the whole notion of the Citizens Redistricting Commission. And in this way, California is a model because we've taken from the elected officials and given it to nonpartisan citizens to draw the districts, and that has made an improvement. But it's just for congressional districts, state assembly, state senate. The Board of Supervisors, which she mentioned, draws their own districts. So if we're going to change things, we have to take that great idea and expand it to local elections, particularly Board of Supervisors. Second, gerrymandering is a problem in the entire United States. And so we should take the Citizens Redistricting Commission and expand that notion to the entire United States. So no elected officials of either party are drawing their own districts because they see this as a resource. And our wonderful Supreme Court in this case also said, well, we're going to let them do whatever they do. We're not going to rule against them. And that sends a terrible signal. Now the question, I'm sorry, how to get that in. Bull is my answer. Opponents of early voting, we want, as the mayor has said, to expand voting, make it as easy as possible. Okay, the biggest reason we have the lowest turnout of any industrialized nation in the world is because restrictions on registration and voting. And when we made it easier for people to vote by mailing everybody a ballot, rather than having to run across town, our voting went up to 71% in the 2020 election, the highest in 100 years or 70 years. So make it easier for people to vote. Turnout goes up. Now, let me ask you a question. What day of the week does France vote? They just went through their elections, and Germany. What's the day of the week?
Better.
Well, close. Who else? Who can tell me? It's a question. Sunday. What day of the week do we vote? Tuesday. Well, gee, guys, Why is that? Ask why. Tuesday voting means the average guy or girl or whatever, student, you work all day and now you're tired, you've commuted on the 5, you got home, and you're sitting there, gee, do I want to get up now and vote? We could easily put it on Sunday, like France and Germany and other countries, but we don't, because we don't really want people to vote. We have this real ambiguity, and that's why you ran around the campuses and you can't, it's easier to figure out what's playing in the local movie theater and to buy tickets and print them than it is to find out where to vote. Now that's changed tremendously. So my answer is vote by mail, and the latest executive order by the governor that everyone's going to get a mail ballot is wonderful. And in fact, we are joining Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Utah, and California. Now, the allegation's been made, oh, we can't do this because there'll be voter fraud. It hasn't happened. Oregon has been voting by mail for 20 years, and they've studied it back and forth. And the only thing it doesn't favor one party or the other. There is no voter fraud. It does increase turnout. Not tremendously, but it's significantly, particularly in special elections. So vote by mail should be nationwide. Make it easier for people to vote, make early voting easier to vote. And it's exactly those things that are being reduced. Access to vote by mail, access to drop boxes, reduction in times. In Georgia, if you give water to somebody standing on line, you can be arrested. That is in their law. If they are standing on line waiting to vote and you go up and give them water, you can be arrested and charged with misdemeanor. Now you tell me what's going on there. So my answer was, the first part of the question, this notion of being less informed, nonsense. It's a cover. And should we expand the vote by mail? Absolutely. It's a great thing. Germany did it in 1957. Colorado's been doing it. In Hawaii, it should be expanded nationwide. And the question is then, why not? Why haven't we done it so far?
This question is directed to Ms. Valencia, and it is, should disinformation that misleads voters in an election be protected under the First Amendment? And should this behavior, purposely misleading a voter, be considered criminal?
Yeah, I think it's like two different things. So voter misinformation or intimidation is not legal and not allowed. But I feel like people frequently misuse the First Amendment. You are able to say things, but it's about a platform and the legitimacy that it's given to them. So if we want to use examples from like the 2016 and the 2020 election, people can put on Facebook, all of this disinformation, and people did, obviously. But Facebook, as it's independent, and that's their First Amendment right, but Facebook is a private entity and a private platform that can create guidelines and rules to preventing certain information to continue to be shared, or foreign agents that create content to cause controversy in different countries, which also happened in 2016, shouldn't also have access to be able to do that. That's a matter of them, of tech companies and these platforms of managing, their platforms, and that's not the First Amendment. So just to clarify, for example, people who say that the earth is flat can put stuff on Facebook. Facebook shouldn't allow certain, and that's okay if that's the community that they have, but the legitimacy that is granted by it through these platforms, because it gives them more revenue, is more of the problem versus a First Amendment right issue. And then I guess to answer the second question about criminalization of it, my personal opinion, I do not believe we should create more things to feed into the criminal legal system. And I am more than happy to talk with others about why I don't think more laws should be created to put people in the criminal legal system, because we know that they are usually applied all laws are applied unevenly, and the people who are more harmed by creating more criminal laws are Black and brown people.
Thank you.
So my question is for Ms. Herrera. Do voters face obstacles locally? If so, what types? And have people faced intimidation?
I know the ACLU was asking me a question about, they called me and asked me like, hey, do you know anyone that is facing like intimidation? Like reach out to us for support. Personally, I have not seen, I've had trust in our registrar, Neil Kelly, for the past couple of years, actually. He hosted a presentation on how to view the budget through he did a workshop. And so he retired, unfortunately, this past year. And so now, I don't know, before there was always, you hear of other offices really politicizing their office, right? But I think in Orange County, there's been trust built into that office. In terms of intimidation, there are people out there, I know that I was trying to look at reporting. There was some folks that were trying to collect ballots in a Republican office. And so I thought that was interesting. But generally, I don't think, I think there's trust that's there. I don't know if any.
I have one
Yes,
example.
please, yes.
So I have one example. So yes, in California, we're very lucky with a lot of different things, but the people who are the most marginalized frequently tend to be the people who face the most obstacles and intimidation. So as I mentioned earlier, people who are currently incarcerated, or several people who are currently incarcerated in Orange County jails, are legally able to vote, but they have to request a ballot. It won't just automatically be sent to them. And the current Orange County Sheriff's Department and sheriff's deputies who hand the people who are incarcerated their mail frequently withhold their mail as punishment. So people who are trying to receive mail from their loved ones are getting their mail withheld as punishment. And the same goes for mailed ballots. So they give it to them like much later, or it's messed up or destroyed. So there's a lot of, this is a new thing. It is extremely new that people who are currently incarcerated in the state of California are able to vote. But unfortunately, we have the huge obstacles of the sheriff's departments being the ones who control that and are the barriers. So the registrar of voters in most counties would be more than happy to create, more access, but the sheriff's department continues to be our obstacle in making that better. Because why would they want the people that they are currently incarcerated to vote for them? Because the sheriff is an elected official.
And I think the population is mostly pretrial. So
right. So these are people who have not been convicted of anything. Yeah. They are just poor and cannot afford to pay a bill.
So yeah, so it's like
Yeah. So if you're rich, maybe you did whatever crime was committed, but you don't have to be there because you are able to afford to get out.
1988, Kurt Pringle, but before many of you were born, Kurt Pringle is running for the state assembly, and the Orange County GOP hired poll guards to go to precincts in largely Latino areas, basically saying through their presence, if you vote, we're going to get you deported. And the courts fined the OCGOP $400,000. That was the largest payout ever in the history of fines, because what they were doing was voter intimidation. Look it up. I'm not making this up. Sorry.
Thank you for the discussion during an election. Let's move on to our fourth group, who is presenting voting suppression after an election. Our presenters, the audience will address.
It's undeniable that many states have laws and rules against it and harm the voters. A specific example in Texas, in which Republicans tried to restrict voting access in March. So specifically in this instance,
12% of the votes, which amounts to 21,000 votes. I really want to emphasize 21,000 votes were rejected under the GOP rules. And so put another way, that ends up being about 1 in 8 Texas voters, making this very significant. Unfortunately, this situation isn't unique to Texas. Specifically, in Georgia, many changes have been made as well, such as voting hours, absentee voting requirements, and ballot boxes. So some of the most significant changes affected absentee voters. To explain, absentee voting is a vote cast by someone who is unable or unable to attend the polling station, which the voter is normally at. So what this can look like is voting via mail, online, voting location. When voting through absentee ballots, most voters need to provide a driver's license or state ID. If not, they have to provide other state documents. To add, the time to request an absentee ballot has also been more contested in this area. Specifically, they must request absentee ballot at least 11 days before election day, and before it used to only be able to request absentee ballots the Friday before election. With this said, it's clear that any votes involved requires changes in routines, especially since tens of thousands of mail-in ballots have been rejected and absentee voting is restricted in pieces of paper.
As I was saying earlier, voter suppression also comes in the form of voting pressure from officials that was not likely as likely to happen in previous years. However, it has times we have seen. Notably, President Trump threatening the Georgia Secretary of State, Redistricting, to essentially find more votes in support of him. Next slide. You can see this is a quote from Trump's so-called order Untitled. He says, and you can't let it happen, and you're letting it happen. You know, I mean, I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have. Additionally, voting pressure on officials comes from candidates, is most likely, but local election officials also may face pressure from citizens themselves. In a new survey completed by the Redistricting for Justice, it is discovered that 1 out of 5 election officials plan to leave their jobs before the 2024 election. Election administrators, the state says Mary Warren, the senior director of the Redi Center, are concerned that they are not getting the support that they need. Poll results show that former President Donald Trump's false attacks on the voting legitimacy process has led to more attacks on election administrators. One of the most common reasons that they cite is that too many politicians were attacking the system that they know is just and fair. There have been reports of citizens also harming election administrators over false information spreading. For example, a woman in Nevada County, California, had to file a restraining order against a citizen who slammed for against her. There have been thoughts about adding bulletproof doors to election administrators' offices.
So it's a little bit hard to read, but as of December, 262 bills were introduced in 41 states and 32 laws were enacted in 17 states that allow state legislatures to politicize and analyze their elections. I really want to point out how staggering of the statistics is, considering that over 80% of American states in which laws are proposed, and almost half of the states have passed. And as Mona said, while it is good that California has had an laws enacted, this isn't the case in most other states. So that said, we simply have been a failure in being satisfied with provisional ballots. So to explain first, a provisional ballot is cast by a voter whose eligibility to vote cannot be proven at polls on election days. So if after the election, administrators determine that the voter cast a provisional ballot to vote, the ballot will be counted as a ballot. So I want to point out that over 3,800 Georgia voters who showed up along with the regional effort were able to cast these provisional ballots. However, most of these votes ended up being rejected. Under the new law, Senate Bill 202, Georgian ballots cast outside of voters' home polling place are disqualified, except to cast after 5 p.m. on election day, making this very hard for voting voters. Even more, there are 26 states, including Georgia, that don't have provisional ballots cast in the wrong precincts. At a law, there are other alternative voters and many alternative communities that would also have voters, with specific examples seen in Arizona. In fact, in Arizona, a state representative, Sean Waller, wanted to allow the Arizona legislature to overturn the results of a presidential election even after the count was formally certified by the governor and secretary of state, and even after voters cast state electors. This proposal has resulted in over 1 dozen Republican lawmakers, and he was very frustrated. Ultimately, the fact that this is being proposed and has support is equity.
And so that said, to Dr. Swaller and to Ms. Herrera.
Me again?
I can go first.
Under the new law,
You're gonna go?
Yeah, let's go.
should we be worried about future presidential elections if other states consider passing laws like the one proposed in Arizona and like the one passed in Georgia, like the ability to disqualify votes and overturn elections?
Yeah, we gotta stop these fascist pigs, like. That's honestly what it is, right? So yeah, we definitely need to be scared. I'm scared, girl. Because it has to do with a lot. I'm scared for democracy in general, for our Supreme Court. You know, it's like, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson, you know, great. But I'm like, yeah, this, you know, they stole a seat from us and Merrick Garland, yes. And so, you know, I think it's a scary time for democracy, but I think that it is definitely a time to stand up and not cave in to fascism, even though it seems very scary. But I will say, you know, it's kind of like you have fascism on one side, and then you have like democracy and capitalism, which is tied to democracy. So I'm kind of like, you know, I'm not all for capitalism, but you know, so I'm like, oh God, you know, like I don't really have much options, and I guess I don't want fascism. So, you know, I think that's like what comes to mind is I think coming together as a community to really hold our values down, because these people are going to pull fast ones on us, right? And so it's really up to us to show up to city council, to get folks to support, like, you know, people to pre-register. Youth can be pre-registered. So it's a scary time for us. I know, I'm scared, but
To pay attention.
yes, pay attention. But I think I wrote something down is that, oh, and dark money. Obviously, this all has to do with like, oh God, you know, this like recent election, you know, with that in Florida and all, you know, so there's a lot of dark money in politics. So we need to get dark money out of politics. We may be outspent, but we can out-organize them. So that's what our focus are. But Dr. Small, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that question.
Should we be worried about future presidential elections if other states considering passing laws? No, we should be terrified. You shouldn't sleep tonight. I'm not kidding. I teach at a university where one of our deans, a prestigious political position that pays a lot of money, is implicated in trying to overthrow the government of the United States. You read it. I'm not talking out of school, as they say. This is, and only a third of the faculty would say, gee, it's not a good thing for one of our faculty members to be using our positions of trust to overthrow the government of the United States. Terrified is the proper word. If you can come up with something stronger, synonym, worried, not enough. I worried about getting home, you know. I worry about the price of gas. I want you to be terrified. Shooting a brick.
Ms. Valencia and Mayor, how is our democracy affected by voter suppression?
Yeah, I can go first. I think the biggest thing is it's going to impact the people in power. So in 2020, if Stacey Abrams, bless her, if she and her, other advocates in Georgia did not take the whole 2 years to make sure that as many Georgians, Black Georgians, voted in that election, we would have a worse numbered Senate than we currently do and make things even more difficult. Like if that truly was what changed the election outcome and the outcome. And now they're passing laws to prevent people like Stacey Abrams and other field organizers from getting people out to vote because they're closing polling places in Black communities. They're making it unlawful for people who are waiting in 7-hour-long lines, unlawful to give them food or drinks. Like it is very scary and to think about how things are going to happen nationwide. In California, we get to be very lucky with not as many obstacles existing. They still are there, but obviously we're one of the 50 states in this country, so we are going to be impacted by what happens nationwide.
Absolutely agree there. We don't see as much voter suppression happening in our state, but again, whatever is happening in our neighboring states or throughout the country are going to, in the long run, affect us because those are the people that are going to be elected to office and making those laws and making the decisions that are going to affect us here. And so, as we're talking about voter suppression, think about ways to help those that are fighting voter suppression. What can we do from here to help those that are really trying to gain the momentum that they need in order to counter the laws that are being passed, in order to educate the communities? So if you have the time or the ability, connect with folks in other states and make sure that you're providing them with the support that they need.
Thank you.
Thinking voter suppression after an election. We'll now turn our attention to what teams can do to educate themselves and get involved in the election process. Presenting educational and community resources and action items, we hear from Anna.
The first set of resources for the voting process. To start off, anyone can register to vote 15 days before an election, and every state has their own registrar voting center in which people are there to direct them to voting centers and just general information sessions for students regarding the voting process. June 7th is the date to vote in the primaries for California, and the November voters will move on to general elections. Some resources that people can refer to include the Orange County Register of Voters, that is where people can register to vote. League of Women Voters of Orange County. They have voting guides to learn more about what is exactly on the ballot, but specifically they fight to reduce the influence that money has in politics, and they do so by raising money to donate to candidates who may not have the resources necessarily to do things like reaching out to people in their counties and making pamphlets, all these things that unfortunately require them to have some sort of financial stability, and this organization that's on that struggle. Then Resilience OC, they focus on the inclusivity of all races, ethnicities, sexual orientation, and they engage with voters year-round, not just during the election process, just to ensure that there are enough people who are registered to vote and ready for the upcoming electoral process. And then I think people who are familiar with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they have great information on the history of voting rights, and they also have information on the recent efforts being in states, unfortunately, that do hinder one's ability to exercise their voting rights. Some action items, especially for teenagers, include, first of all, registering to vote. I think many people do know at the age of 61, you can register to vote. And it's really important just to be aware of our rights and be ready to exercise them in the future. Then educating oneself regarding the history of voter suppression, really great resources include National Geographic and the Secretary of American School for Liberty Union, the ACLU. And another one that people aren't as familiar with is voluntary jury campaigns. Believe it or not, high schoolers specifically are always welcome to volunteer in a campaign. They do things like cold calling, going door to door, just in general educating their own school about the voting process, the candidates, and oftentimes they enlist the younger generation, not necessarily to encourage a vote for a candidate, but more so to encourage one to just exercise that vote regardless of who they vote for, which is just in general important to exercise this really important, right? But yeah, overall, those are really important action items that people, teenagers, older, can take to ensure that we combat voter suppression on our own terms. So yeah, thank you.
We do have a few
Questions. First, Mayor Khan. How can teens get involved with the voting process in Orange County?
Absolutely. Some of the things that you mentioned already in the slide, making sure that you're pre-registered, making sure that you are getting involved. We have in the city of Irvine, we do a summer internship program for high schoolers and students in college. I definitely recommend you guys signing up for that if you're interested. That way you kind of get involved in all aspects of local government, get to know how it works a little bit better, and volunteering on different campaigns, not just candidate campaigns, but there are many different nonprofit groups or political groups that are going to be providing registration efforts, voter education efforts. The League of Women Voters are amazing because if you go on their website, one of the things that you'll see is whether it's a ballot initiative, they'll break it down to who's funding what, where the money is coming from. So it gives you an idea, a better idea of what's behind the scenes. Because sometimes those ballot initiatives come out and they sound really amazing. They have a great name, but when you find out who's funding them, you kind of want to think, wait a minute, why would they be funding this? And then you kind of dig a little bit deeper. So get involved in all of these different organizations, or even in a candidate's campaign to get that hands-on experience. Because I'll tell you, one of the things we were talking about voter suppression earlier, we don't have laws that are suppressing voters, but we have voters that self-suppress as well, right? There's a lot of voters that don't feel like their vote counts. And that's where we need to come in and make sure that we're educating them that their vote does count. And that's very important moving forward.
Thank you. And Sarah, what is being done in Orange County to increase voter education?
Great question. So what is being done? So there are a couple things. You mentioned that on the slide, the pre-registration drives. So resilience, we've done pre-registration at Santiago High School. We've registered over the past 5 years. For the five years, we've been there pre-registering youth, making sure that they are ready, once the election comes, once they turn 18 and that they're allowed to vote. There's also tied to that, I know we're doing volunteer opportunities for Get Out the Votes, nonpartisan, 501c3 eligible for getting out the vote. If you're interested, we can chat after. That's from May to June, after school and on the weekends as well. In regards to it's important that youth get involved. And two of the ways that I'm seeing this play out in Costa Mesa and in Orange. In Costa Mesa, District 4 has the highest youth population. So it's like, oh my God, youth, you have to get involved so much because you're not 18, you can't vote. Why am I gonna listen to you, right? But it's like, no, you are the future. And I think your voice definitely counts, especially if you're 32% of the district, in that district are youth, 32%. And so it's important that you all have a voice. And in El Medina, Orange, that area is unincorporated. This is the first time that they're gonna have, that little El Medina neighborhood is gonna be a part of District 2. the most progressive district ever. And well, you know, in Orange County. And so there's a high youth population right there too. So there are youth all over Orange County, and they always tell me about the boomers, right? And how the boomers have dominated so much. And hopefully it's gonna be time for the millennials soon, right? And Generation X, you know, I think it's time. But you all, Gen Z, the Zoomers, right? You all, there's so many of you, and you all are, you know, right now it's scary with this democracy thing, you know, but you all are, you know, all of us are in it together, but you all are gonna be here longer. So, you know, keep at it, and I'll definitely be there. There's a bunch of groups out there that you all can get involved with. There is Viet Rise, right, that works in Little Saigon. There's Chicanos Unidos that works on gentrification and displacement. There's our organization, Resilience Orange County, Tenants United, Santana, and so many orgs that are addressing all these issues in Orange County. We see each other often in the same circles, right? Because environmental justice has to do everything with women's rights. Women's rights has everything to do with LGBTQ rights. LGBTQ rights has everything to do with displacement and gentrification and voting rights. All of these things are very important. And Orange County is being shaken up, and the old white guard is getting scared, you know, but you know what? Changes are coming, and there's nothing, as was mentioned in that presentation, 2050 needs to get here sooner, you know. But yes, you all are the future, so get out there. Woo! Great.
As the session is coming to an end, let's give a round of applause for all our presenters. And I would like to ask the panelists for any concluding remarks, first hearing from Dr. Smoller.
Me? Oh, some people think diversity is a threat. I think, and I think a lot of people in this room see it as a blessing. Well, we're in the majority. Look at your money, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And that is reinforced. It's not just only the morally correct view, it's reinforced by great thinkers like James Madison, who wrote in Federalist Number 10, we want diversity. He called it factions, because the more diversity we have in our society, the freer each of us will be. And those are words that animated the Constitution. The people who won this fight were you guys. Read about Freedom Summer in the early 60s. 60 years ago, young people, high school and college students got on buses, they went to the South, and they said, what you're doing here is completely inconsistent with democracy. They're the ones who won it, and I think they will win it back again. Let me just close with what Johnson wrote said in that brilliant speech, just briefly. Lyndon Johnson, our president, what happened in Selma is part of a far larger movement which reaches into every section and state of America, is the effort of American Negroes to accrue for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too. Because it is not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and I'll add voter suppression. And then he said, and I quote, and we shall overcome.
Yeah, I think, if we're going to talk about voting rights, obviously voting is extremely important, and not everyone has that right for many different reasons. I think the biggest thing is trying to make voting the most accessible as possible. So no barriers. The United States historically and continues to make voting one of the most difficult, unpleasant, boring things. Honestly, because they don't want more people to vote. So we can keep working to change that. And I would say, like, you're all obviously very involved and educated, but continue doing that and questioning how things are and envisioning them to be better. I frequently think, or when I was your age in high school, I was just, well, this is just how things are. And I was like, oh, okay. But now it's like, well, we don't have to live like this. We've never had to live like this. Certain people in power, which have been, majority men who are white, have upheld a system that has protected them. And that's how they wanted it. And they succeeded. Great job. But now things are changing. And now we have more of a voice and an ability to change things. So all of these obstacles that feel overwhelming, it's because they know that we do have power and that things can be better and that we demand that things be different. So anytime you're doing research or learning things, just think about where those resources are coming from. Think who's the author, like what potentially do they have to gain? Or what are they trying to tell you? But also if you're trying to envision things that are better, think about the people who are being the most impacted. There's lots of things that I'm not personally impacted by, so I don't believe that I know the right way to move forward in certain things. If we're talking about reimagining or redoing the criminal legal system, I haven't been impacted with that the same way that people who have been incarcerated have been. Maybe they're the ones who should be the leaders in those things. So learning from others, especially those that have been the most marginalized and persecuted by our systems, and just thinking forward. We truly don't have to live like this. And I believe in the younger generations of moving things forward in a better way for everyone, and not just in a better way for those who are wealthy, those who have access to capital, those who are white men. And that I believe that it can be better. And I hope for a day where I can vote for candidates that share my values and not the way I currently vote, which is the lesser of two evils.
I think just in our final wrap up, just never give up hope. I think that's so important because I think sometimes all the negativity, all the things that we hear in our daily lives brings us down. And I know sometimes it's just like, okay, why are we even continuing to fight? It seems like a never-ending battle, but that's not the case. We have made a lot of improvements because we have fought on. And so my encouragement to you is to continue that fight, to continue to challenge things that you feel are not right, to make sure that your voices are heard, even when people are telling you that your voices don't matter. Be there. I mean, I wouldn't be in this position if I listened to the person that told me that I was unelectable because of my name, right? And so people are going to tell you things. You're going to hear things from people that you think are on your side. And that's where you need to step it up on your own. If what you believe in your heart is you got to do something, you got to make a difference, go out there and make that difference. Don't let anyone stop you.
I've been organizing for a minute, and you get called all sorts of names. And I've been called an outside agitator for my own city council. And I think don't be afraid to. It made me think of that John Lewis quote about
good trouble.
Yes, never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble, because that's what it is, and looking back, I'm like, wow, I'm not a youth anymore. I'm 30, which is, when you're 30, you're like, I'm old, but then I guess older folks tell you that that's not old, right? But I think as youth, see yourself in the future, where things are gonna be when you're 30, where things are gonna be when you're older, and who are gonna be the youth that are gonna come after you, right? In the same way, and sharing those experiences about the times that we went through that pandemic and where you saw democracy fail. And well, the drivers of democracy, right? Because I still believe in democracy and I want to hold on to it, but we need to see change and you know, inspire the next generation and continue to do good trouble.
Thank you, panelists, for your concluding remarks. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you to our virtual audience who tuned in. We hope you've enjoyed our team talk on voter education and suppression. It's been my pleasure being your MC tonight, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Leslie Nicholas, IUCC.
We thank our, actually, thank you for our.
That's so cute.
Oh my God. Booty. I thought just the chocolate chip
Thank you
was.
so much, Felicity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
For goodies. Very true.
Right? We also, if you put the slide up, please, would like to thank the donors who graciously gave their which you all will be able to take them outside for the reception.
Yes, I guess we're gonna have some more questions. And I just want to also, in addition, we just thank the panel so much. And wanted to thank Jeanette, student scientist. How much Jeanette worked tirelessly with so much determination and organization with the students on the content and research of this event. And it was just done with so much love and care for all, for their learning and for all of us to listen. So thank you so much.
I have worked with Jeanette for over a year, in our past team group, and we're so excited to have collaboration with the information. And Jeanette has really put her all into this. This is her event, truly. She was on vacation organizing this. It's been months of preparation. Even today, there were last minute changes, and Jeanette was on top of everything. You should see the amount of Google Docs that we have, emails, text, and it's all, it really has Jeanette. This would be together. So please give her another.
Morning. We need to send out here too. In all of this, putting together and sort of please, sort of party.
I just want to say in those remarks that we're here to protect the right to vote and ensure that your voice and all voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh.
Right now, we're working with the Orange County.
Okay.
On the AAR.
Yes, they are too.
AAR, what
Yes.
Yeah.
Set aside for their, if you want to make sure it's the right hand.
Yes, that was very exciting. So most of our work right now is Garden Grove, Costa Mesa and Orange.
Okay.
Most of it has been in Santa Ana, and like we're like, well, there's too many works. We're like, let's go into like areas where it's like less support. You know? Oh, I wonder what goodies we got.